A teenager who lured an 8-year-old to an apartment and brutally sexually assaulted her and killed her back in 2015 now may have a chance to be released. You might be shocked by that, but this is the law in California. We're going to talk about what his chances are to actually be released as we do a full breakdown on the death of 8-year-old Maddy Middleton. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Nearly a decade has passed since Santa Cruz, California was shaken to its core by just a horrifying crime. A teenage boy lured an innocent 8-year-old girl into his home with the promise of ice cream, only to brutally assault and murder her. It is absolutely devastating. But now in 2025, Adrian A.J. Gonzalez, the teen convicted of brutally murdering 8-year-old Madyson Middleton, says he's ready to re-enter society. But that is not going to be up to him. That is going to be up to a jury who will have to decide if he gets released. It is a unique aspect of the law because you might be wondering, how is it possible that a convicted murderer is back on trial facing the possibility of release? Well, Adrian Gonzalez was 15 years old when he sexually assaulted and murdered Maddy, his neighbor. And he spent the remainder of his juvenile years locked up in a detention center after he pleaded guilty back in 2021 to her killing. But under California law, when a person is convicted as a juvenile, he or she can actually be released on their 25th birthday unless prosecutors can prove that they still pose a threat to society and have to remain incarcerated. And that is where we are right now. Gonzalez turned 25 back in October. His trial for release began in November. And after weeks of testimony and a month-long holiday hiatus, proceedings are now coming to a close. And a jury will soon decide whether this killer will walk free. So I got to give you a bit of background here, and it is, again, horrible case. It all started on a warm summer day on July 26 of 2015 when Maddy, described as this vibrant and happy child, 8 years old, went missing at around 5 p.m. According to a timeline that was shared by police, Maddy was last seen on video surveillance riding her scooter near her home at the Tannery Artist Lofts in Santa Cruz. An hour later, her mother had called 911 to report this little girl missing. Officers, they sprang into action very quickly to try to find Maddy. They conducted an exhaustive search of the area where she disappeared from. The FBI even became involved in the search efforts, but it all ended a day later when authorities made a devastating discovery. Former Santa Cruz Police Chief Kevin Vogel announced the heartbreaking update during a press conference back in 2015.
A Santa Cruz police detective conducted a secondary and more thorough canvass of the complex, which included the search of a recycle bin located in an enclosure on the first floor parking structure at the Tannery Arts Center complex. Maddy's body was located within that recycle bin. Without compromising the important investigative facts or the integrity of this investigation, I will merely say that Maddy's body was concealed in a recycle bin in a way that was not obvious or readily apparent. There was a 15-year-old male juvenile who resides in an apartment on the property upstairs from the location where Maddy's body was found. And he was nearby when Maddy was located. He was subsequently taken into custody, where he was brought back to the Santa Cruz Police Department and interviewed. Investigators from the Santa Cruz Police Department interviewed this individual into the early morning hours this morning, and he was subsequently arrested for the murder of Madyson Middleton.
So Maddy's lifeless body was hidden in a recycling bin in the parking garage of the very apartment complex where she was living. And that discovery became even more horrifying after police arrested the teenager who lived in the very same apartment complex, who police say knew this little girl, and that was 15-year-old Adrian Jerry A.J. Gonzalez. According to the criminal complaint, Gonzalez lured Maddy to his apartment under the pretense of offering her ice cream, where he then did what is essentially the unthinkable. Because once inside, he ties her up, he beats her, he rapes her, he strangles her, before eventually stabbing her in the neck and dumping her body in the recycling bin downstairs. And when Gonzalez was initially arrested, prosecutors charged him as an adult for what he did. Now, in 2019, there was a new law that was passed in California, and that prevented the prosecution of anyone under 16 as an adult. So this meant that Gonzalez can only be tried in juvenile court, where the maximum sentence would keep him incarcerated until his 25th birthday in October of last year. So before we go any further into this, I want to bring somebody on to help me break it all down. I want to bring on civil rights attorney Joe Richardson, friend of the show. Joe, thanks so much for coming on. Really appreciate you taking the time. First of all, I was going to ask you your thoughts on the case, but before you jumped on, you were telling me you're from California. This was a big case. People were talking about it, right?
Yeah, it was a big case. It took place up in Santa Cruz, where everything's kind of relaxed, right? Not only in what happened to this girl, but the manner, the way that it happened, and the idea that it was a 15-year-old kid that did it, and a 15-year-old kid that wasn't a guy that had gotten in a whole lot of trouble. He had a couple things happen, but this, came from far afield for everyone. And so it rocked the community to its core. And then, you have these bigger questions as well about, if there's any time you're going to try someone as an adult, wouldn't this be it? And then there's a question related to the law. And it was actually challenged in court, et cetera. And so it was really interesting just on a whole lot of levels, as much as it was shocking.
Yeah, so this is just a really, really disturbing case. And look, the stories we cover here on Sidebar show that the world can be scary. It's true. And for those of you thinking, how do I go about protecting myself from all that's out there? I'll tell you what, if you think about protecting your home, what property is more important to protect than that? I didn't even know this, but apparently home title fraud is rampant right now. Yeah, so I met with the people over at Home Title Lock. They're our amazing partner and sponsor. They freaked me out. This is an example of a fraudulent quitclaim deed. Got filled out with my information, forged signature, fake notary seal. Not only can my property just get transferred behind my back, but the scammers, they go after the equity. They take out loans using your home as collateral. They will do that. They will disappear, and they will leave you with a legal and financial nightmare. But that is where Home Title Lock comes in to give you peace of mind, especially with their triple lock protection. Why? Because that gets you 24/7 monitoring, alerts of any changes, and restoration services at no out-of-pocket cost to you. So to protect your home, you go to HometitleLock.com/sidebar. Make sure to use promo code SIDEBAR. You'll get a 30-day free trial of their triple lock protection and a free title history report to make sure you aren't already a victim. What do you make of the California law? Do you think it's appropriate, having this legal safeguard, even when you're dealing with cases as severe as this? Actually, it's like a law school example. Come up with the most heinous crime you can imagine, yet the perpetrator is 15 years old, deserves a chance of release when they hit 25. Do you agree with this law?
There is something to the notion that kids' brains aren't fully developed until the age of 16. That being said, does that mean that absolutely, without equivocation, you always say that someone that has committed a crime like this could never be tried as an adult? Always and never are two very, very difficult words to say. And one might argue that if you would make an exception to your own rule, we always say in our business, you need someone to make an exception to your own rule if you're trying to get him to give you money, if you're trying to get him to fill in the blank. But is this one of those cases where maybe they should have thrown the book at this kid where he could never get out of jail again? I think it's just very, very difficult because there's always a risk that you get it wrong. He gets released at 25 and he offends again. And so I'd love to be committal about the notion of whether this law ought to exist. I think generally speaking, it's probably a good law in that it recognizes that the development of children happens at a certain point. But that being said, that doesn't mean it should always mean that someone in this type of situation should always have the opportunity to get out at the age of 25.
I wonder if there would be an exception of some kind. Well, look, that's what we want to get into now. So I got to give you a bit of background on Gonzalez. According to the Mercury News, Gonzalez was once a counselor at the artist residential community, and he was known as an easygoing teenager, loved yo-yos, skateboarding. To those who knew him, he was just this normal kid. He was quiet, friendly, seemingly harmless. So when police accused him of committing, again, the most heinous crime imaginable, the community was in complete shock. okay? And that's, I think, one of the most chilling aspects of this story. Somebody you wouldn't suspect doing this. Now, I want to get into the darker parts of his background. So as investigators pieced together Gonzalez's life, his social media presence was alarming. A local NBC affiliate reported on one post in particular that kind of stood out. It was a black and white clip of hands playing the piano to Mad World, the haunting song that was made famous by Donnie Darko, a film about a teenager spiraling into disturbing fantasies, committing a series of crimes. And the caption beneath it was a line from the song, "The dreams in which I'm dying are the best I've ever had." You know, Joe, that post, apparently made on the day he killed Maddy. What do you take away from that?
Well, it sounds like he was previewing what he was getting ready to do, right? And so even though there's no excuse for what he did, you get to that question of whether there are reasons that potentially should hold him for longer than even, the law acknowledges. And so it is a very, very difficult thing because it does seem like, despite the fact that he was a counselor, et cetera, and despite the fact that this was shocking, once you put together some of the information, the social media stuff and things like that, maybe there was a bit of a prelude to it. And so fast forward, and then we'll get to it, of course, is what does that mean we ought to do right now? And that's a hard question.
And that's the question we're going to try to get to. I will tell you, though, Gonzalez's fate was pretty much sealed. There was so much hard evidence. According to the San Francisco Chronicle, surveillance footage directly linked him to the crime. There was video from outside the apartment complex that showed him disposing of Maddy's body just minutes before her mother called police to report her missing. Incredibly disturbing. Gonzalez was seen visiting that bin twice after officers arrived. And even more chilling, he asked them during the search if they were making any progress in finding her. You know, Joe, when you think about that, how significant is that, this behavior, in terms of indicating a lack of remorse, which again goes to the larger question?
They had him dead to rights. And so everybody knew that he'd done it once the police put it all together. But all of the other things that are figuring in now and being talked about, and by the way, we got to remember, this is the first time he's being tried because he took that deal, which, SB 1391 gave him the opportunity to take, right? But now you're looking at all of the things. You're looking at the lack of remorse. You're looking at him not emoting, seeing like there was regret or any of those. All of that stuff is missing. And so that's what's really shocking about this, because now you get to have those discussions that, frankly, you didn't get to have before because there was no trial before.
And I just want to give our audience a little bit more context to this story if they don't know what we're going into. So in 2021, Gonzalez eventually pleaded guilty to Maddy's murder, admitted to the crime. Since he pleaded guilty in juvenile court, he couldn't be sentenced to life in prison. And before he was sentenced, Maddy's mother, Laura Jordan, she addressed him. According to Lookout Santa Cruz, she reportedly said, "You stole my joy, my ability to laugh sincerely, leaving me with utter and complete hopelessness. I have been hollowed out by your cruel, brutal, unconscionable act." Gonzalez did seemingly offer some sort of apology. He said that he hoped that Maddy's family would one day forgive him, saying, "I understand there's very little I can say after all the pain and suffering I've caused. My goal is to work on my issues so no one else has to experience what you have endured." But as his release date drew near, the Santa Cruz County District Attorney's Office filed a petition to challenge his release, arguing that Gonzalez still posed a significant danger to society. And after a 3-week hearing last summer, a Superior Court judge ruled that a jury should decide whether or not Gonzalez should remain incarcerated. So the case finally reached trial in November. 12 jurors were tasked with deciding Gonzalez's fate. And during opening statements, prosecutors painted a chilling picture. They said Gonzalez is a calculated, remorseless killer. Assistant District Attorney Tara George called him a master at deception, highlighting his allegedly calm demeanor following the crime. She recounted how in the hours after killing Maddy, Gonzalez even walked to a Chipotle with a friend, even expressed hope that police would find the missing girl. But then you hear the other side. Defense attorney Charlie Stevens presented a starkly different narrative, describing Gonzalez's traumatic upbringing, which was marked by neglect, exposure to domestic violence, homelessness. He told the jury Gonzalez moved 37 times before settling at the Tannery Arts Center. He argued that Gonzalez was a suicidal teenager. He acted out with severe mental health struggles, but that he had made significant progress in treatment, that he posed no threat if he's released under strict conditions. So, Joe, now we're getting to the heart of this. It's not a typical trial, right? It's rather a post-conviction release hearing, but we don't see it often. But it seems like it's playing out very similar to a trial, right? You're going over some key pieces of evidence, the case. Is this an uphill battle for him to be released?
I think the short answer is yes. Among other things, when he was convicted 4 or 5 years ago, I think you've got a different landscape now. And I think that because of that, people are a little less sympathetic. And here's the other part. This is not a question of whether he's there, gets out today, or he's there for life. This is about an additional 2 years. And so, I think that, frankly, there's a lot less that's at stake, right? In that this is not life or now. This is a different situation where you're not talking about holding on to him forever in any event. And I think it's going to be hard. I think it is somewhat uphill because I think that, the prosecution has been able to extract some things even on cross, the diagnosis of autism and all of these other things. I can imagine, what does that have to do with anything for a jury, right?
Let me get to that. I mean, because again, the question is, how do you prove someone is still a risk? How do you know for sure? How do you can say someone's rehabilitated? How do you know for sure? And as this trial progressed, jurors, they saw a lot. They were able to see that 2015 police video where Gonzalez actually confessed to killing Maddy. This was from July 27th. This was just 2 days after Maddy disappeared. And during that interrogation, Gonzalez first told detectives that he had seen Maddy near some mosaic benches at the apartment complex where they spoke about food in the summer. He was then shown surveillance footage of what we mentioned earlier, himself carrying a trash bin toward dumpsters. And now also reportedly caught on this video is Gonzalez appearing to scan his surroundings before dumping the bag. So Gonzalez first lied, saying he was taking out recycling, but detectives really weren't buying this because the weight of the bin would suggest otherwise. And oddly, this actually prompted Gonzalez to ask if they found Maddy in the dumpsters, which raised further suspicion. So, Joe, before we even get to the mental health part, this video, I think, can play a crucial piece of evidence in this trial or this hearing.
Yeah, I think so, because there's someone with consciousness of guilt. He knows he's guilty. He's being deceptive, right? He's lying. And then there's this part of him that, is treating everything like everything's everything. He's going to Chipotle with a friend. Those aren't things that exactly engender sympathy because there's regret, because there's remorse, because there's second thoughts. Looks like he was just going to write it as long as it could be written. And so therefore, that doesn't exactly necessarily put him on the side of those that would say, we think that you ought to be released right now.
And look, he eventually confessed. I mean, as the interrogation continued, detectives told Gonzalez, Maddy was dead before we even got there. We will find fingerprints. If those are yours, that'll be scary. So he confessed. He admitted that he strangled Maddy, that he sexually violated her. He claimed he was struggling with his mental health, that he wasn't really able to explain his actions. And during that interrogation, Gonzalez agreed to write an apology letter to Laura Jordan, again, Maddy's mother. And some of that letter was read aloud in court by prosecutors. And it said, what I did was reckless, unlike me, spontaneous, and permanent. Hating me would be an understatement. So let's talk about mental health real quick. Joe was talking about it. So the prosecution called a forensic psychologist to the stand, Dr. Susan Napolitano, who actually testified that Gonzalez exhibited the traits of a psychopath, that his actions demonstrate sophistication and premeditation, possible sexual sadism. She suggested that luring Maddy under the guise of offering her ice cream could indicate grooming behavior and a desire for control. And as for the possibility of rehabilitation, Dr. Napolitano argued that violent offenders, they sometimes function better in structured settings like incarceration, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the person is rehabilitated. Now, the defense countered this. They countered this assessment with witnesses of their own, including youth justice advocates and a therapist who testified that Gonzalez was attentive to his mental health issues, that he was working towards improvements, The therapist, Stephen Capasso, who worked with Gonzalez between 2015 and 2017, said he was calm, he was respectful, he was engaged in therapy, that his depressive symptoms improved within a few months of therapy. Two youth justice advocates, Mel Flanagan and Crystal Navarro, who worked with Gonzalez through education and reentry programs, testified that he was one of the most engaged young people they encountered. And then this past week's testimony provided deeper insights into Gonzalez's psychological state with more defense witnesses. We had psychiatrist Richard J. Shaw, who evaluated Gonzalez in both 2014, 2016, diagnosed him with autism spectrum disorder, explained how the condition can manifest in behaviors like difficulty with emotional regulation, social interactions. Prosecutor George challenged Shaw's findings, emphasizing that no diagnosis could fully explain the brutal and calculated nature of Gonzalez's crime. So, Joe, I ask you, how does a jury weigh all that? I'm not sure what they're supposed to do.
Boy, yeah, I mean, who knows? They might end up just taking the experts and canceling them out and going to their own opinion. However, I think one of the things for them to look at is that people shouldn't be going out murdering folks. But as it pertains to what the experts say, these are the things that help us to see something like this is coming. And this is how they're evaluated. A lot of this particular case is off-center that way. And so because of that, the test might mean a little bit less. Is there a possibility that he's a psychopath? Even though on the psychopath test, I forget what it's called, he gets a 17 and you have to be 30 to be a psychopath. Yeah, it's absolutely a possibility because among other things, they don't really have anything quite like this to compare it to. And so what they can do is they can look at the information that's been provided, the psychiatrist's testimony, where, even on the cross, he had to admit that, one, he doesn't evaluate a lot of murderers. Two is that he's rehabilitated, he's doing well, but he's lied to him before. So, it's like pay attention, but don't pay attention. Take value in it, weigh it, but don't weigh it or don't make it totally conclusive. So it's a little bit of a square peg in a round hole, even for the jury. And my sense is that their common sense is going to have to come in over and above all of this contradictory information that's, fighting against one side or the other.
And look, the final witnesses are going to testify this week. This jury faces a daunting decision. In the end of the day, we're talking about, is Adrian Gonzalez a rehabilitated person who deserves a second chance, or is he a threat? The outcome, is not only going to determine his future, but it will also send a powerful message about the potential for rehabilitation, the limits of mercy when you deal with such a heinous crime. So there's going to be a lot of people watching it. Joe Richardson, really appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much and great seeing you.
Yeah, likewise. Good to see you, Jesse.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.